Topic. The monitor flatlined at 11:47 a.m. Right there. Middle of the hallway. In front of everyone, Claire's hands were already moving before the alarm finished sounding. No hesitation. No request for permission. Topic. She dropped to her knees beside the gurney, 2 fingers on the man's neck, 1 second, then both palms locked on his chest. Compression. Compression. Around her, 12 people stood frozen. Topic. Nurses. Orderlies. A doctor in scrubs who had 20 years on her. Nobody moved. Then the footsteps came hard soles on polished floors. Slow. Deliberate. Topic. The kind of footsteps that had emptied rooms for a decade. Who authorized this? The voice cut through the hallway like a fire alarm. Sharp, certain, used to stopping things. Claire didn't stop. Topic. I'm talking to you. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Just counted
Analyzing
compressions
rhythm.
in her head the way she'd been trained.
not touch the
Not in
patient.
any hospital.
Shock
Topic.
advised.
Not in any
Charging.
classroom. Somewhere with no ceiling and no floor and no room for hesitation at all. The man behind her
Stand
stepped
clear.
closer. The nurses near the wall took one small step back. Topic. And then the patient gasped one breath. Ragged real. LeClaire sat back on her heels, steady. She finally looked up, not at the patient, directly at the man in the expensive suit. Topic. The hallway went completely still. Nobody had ever looked at him like that.
You are the
3 weeks
anomaly,
earlier,
Doctor.
Claire Donovan had walked
And I
through these
intend
doors
to
for the
find
very
out
first
why
time.
my system
Nobody knew
failed
her
to
name.
predict your
Topic. Nobody thought to
interference.
ask. Topic. The monitor flatlined at 11:47 a.m. Right there. Middle of the hallway. In front of everyone. Claire's hands were already moving before the alarm finished sounding. No hesitation, no request for permission. Topic. She dropped to her knees beside the gurney, 2 fingers on the man's neck, 1 second, then both palms locked flat on his chest. Compression, compression, compression around her. Topic. 12 people stood frozen. Nurses, orderlies. A doctor in green scrubs who had 20 years on her. All of them, completely still, like someone had pressed pause on every person in that hallway except her. Topic. Nobody moved. Then the footsteps came hard soles on polished floors. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that had been emptying rooms in this building for a decade. Who authorized this? Topic. The voice cut through the hallway like something cold and sharp. Certain. Used to stopping things. Claire didn't stop. I'm talking to you. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Topic. Just kept counting in her head the way she had been trained. Not in any hospital, not in any classroom. Somewhere with no ceiling and no floor and no room for hesitation at all. The man stepped closer. Topic. The nurses near the wall took one small step back, and then the patient gasped. One breath. Ragged. Real Claire sat back on her heels. Steady. She looked up slowly. Not at the patient. Topic. Directly at the man standing behind her in the expensive suit. The hallway went completely still. Nobody had ever looked at him like that. 3 weeks earlier, Claire. Topic. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, small duffel bag. Paper cup of coffee gone cold somewhere between the parking garage and the entrance. Topic. She stood in the lobby of Mercy Cross Hospital for a moment, just a moment, and took it all in. Polished floors, pale blue walls, the shade hospitals choose because someone once decided it was calming. Topic. Large windows letting in October light. A woman at reception smiling at visitors with the careful brightness of someone who had learned to smile on command. It looked like exactly what it claimed to be. Topic. Which was the first thing that put Claire on alert, because she had spent 8 years in places that looked exactly like what they claimed to be. Secure, organized, controlled. Topic. And she had learned, in ways that left marks she couldn't show anyone, that the places working hardest to look calm were almost always the ones with the most noise underneath. Topic. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, took a sip of cold coffee, and walked in. The charge nurse who processed her paperwork apologized 3 times for the wait and twice for a pen that kept skipping. Topic. Claire told her it was fine, both times, and meant it. While waiting, she looked around. Topic. The nursing station was organized the way a surface gets organized, when someone is working very hard to keep everything in its place. Clipboards at precise angles. Topic. Supplies arranged with a rigid neatness that went slightly past practical. 3 nurses moved through the space in a choreography that looked normal, almost except their movements were too tight. Topic. Too economical. Like people who had learned to take up as little space as possible, she filed it away. Said nothing. Topic. Her full name was Claire Ann Donovan, 30 years old, 5 feet 5. Brown hair kept pulled back, a habit she had never managed to unlearn. She had a way of standing, weight slightly forward, topic, feet shoulder-width apart, that made her look like she was about to either catch something falling or get out of the way of something incoming. Topic. She had spent 8 years as a combatant medic with the United States Marine Corps. Staff Sergeant. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. Topic. The kind of work that involved helicopter floors and dust and the sound a radio makes when someone is calling in a casualty report from 3 kilometers away. Topic. She had held men together with her hands while waiting for evacuation, made decisions in under 4 seconds that most people couldn't make in 4 hours. Topic. Done things she was proud of and things she tried very hard not to think about after midnight, and then she had come home. Home was quieter than she expected, in ways that weren't entirely comfortable. Topic. The quiet of a grocery store, the quiet of her own apartment at 2 in the morning when nothing was wrong, nothing at all wrong, which somehow made it harder to sleep. Topic. She had applied to Mercy Cross because it was hiring, because it was 40 minutes from her apartment, because nursing was the closest civilian translation of everything her hands already knew how to do. Topic. She had not told anyone about Afghanistan, not because she was hiding it, because the moment you said the words, people started looking at you differently. Topic. Either with careful reverence that made her uncomfortable, or with the slightly panicked expression of someone trying to change the subject. She wasn't a story, she was just a nurse, starting a new job. Topic. On a Tuesday in October, that was all. Topic. Her first real conversation at Mercy Cross was with Dorothy Wells. Dorothy was 67 years old, a nurse here for 27 years, gray hair cut short and practical. Topic. Reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead because she was always about to need them and never quite pausing long enough to put them on properly. Topic. She moved through the ward the way a person moves through a space they know so well they could navigate it with their eyes closed, which she probably could. Topic. She found Claire by the medication cabinet on the first morning, reading the intake procedure printout with the focused attention of someone memorizing new terrain. Dorothy appeared beside her silently. Topic. Set down a cup of coffee without saying anything, then waited until Claire looked up. You take it black? Dorothy asked. Yes, good, because there's no milk. Topic. Hasn't been milk in that refrigerator since February. Someone keeps stealing it. At this point, I've decided I simply don't care. Claire looked at the coffee, then at Dorothy. Thank you. Dorothy nodded. Topic. Then said quietly, without making it a big thing at all, keep your head down. 6 more months and I'm free. She said it the way you say something you've been repeating to yourself for a long time. Topic. Like a number you count because the counting itself is what keeps you going. Then she walked away. Claire stood there with the coffee in her hand and thought, 6 more months from what? She didn't ask. Topic. But she remembered it. Topic. She met Dr. Ruth Baxter on day 2. Ruth was 61, a surgical attending with 22 years at Mercy Cross. Topic. The kind of doctor who moved through a room and made it feel slightly better organized for her having been in it. She had grown up in a family where no one had gone past high school. She was the first. Topic. The only. She had a framed photograph. She never brought it to work, of herself in her graduation gown, standing between her mother and her grandmother, topic. All three of them grinning like they had just won something enormous, which they had. That photograph was from 30 years ago. Now, Ruth walked through Mercy Cross with her eyes slightly downward, topic. Not always. Just often enough that Claire noticed. It was the same small adjustment she had seen in two other people this week, topic. The way you hold your head when you've learned that looking directly at something sometimes costs more than looking away. Claire didn't know yet what that thing was. She suspected she would find out, topic. She met Megan Flores on day 3, 26 years old, dark hair, quick eyes, a laugh that happened fast and then got swallowed, like someone who had learned not to take up too much space. She was kind, topic, competent. And she had a specific habit of glancing toward the end of the hallway before she said anything not directly related to a patient's chart, like she was checking whether someone was coming. Topic. Practical information offered with a smile. But as Megan walked away, Claire noticed the way she adjusted her shoulders, pulling them in, just slightly, like she was making herself a smaller target. Topic. She saw Victor Hale for the first time on day 4. She heard him first. His voice carried, not because he was loud, exactly, because it was the kind of voice that expected walls to move out of its way. Topic. This is not what I asked for. She was turning the corner from the supply corridor when she heard it. She stopped. Through the glass partition of the conference room, she could see him. 50s, topic, well-dressed in a way that was calibrated, not accidental. Dark suit, cufflinks, silver at the temples in the way that makes certain men look distinguished rather than old. Topic. He was standing at the head of the table, hands flat on the surface, weight pushed forward, establishing dominance over people who were sitting down. 3 people sat across from him. Topic. A department coordinator, a junior doctor, a woman with a tablet trying very hard to look like she wasn't afraid. I asked for the Q3 discharge numbers in one consolidated report, Hale said. Topic. Each word precise, not 3 separate files, not 2 emails and a printout. One document. The coordinator said something Claire couldn't hear through the glass. That is not what I asked for, topic, as if the explanation was simply irrelevant. This is your 3rd error this quarter. I don't think you understand what 3 means in this context. The coordinator went very still. Topic. The junior doctor looked at the table. Nobody said anything. Claire watched for 4 more seconds. Then she walked on. She had seen this before. Not in a hospital. Topic. In a place with different furniture and different stakes, but the exact same silence from the people sitting down. She knew what that silence meant. Topic. It meant everyone in that room had calculated the cost of speaking up, precisely, and decided they couldn't pay it. Topic. On day 5, she saw him in the hallway. A nurse, late 30s, dark circles, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield, had apparently submitted a patient discharge summary in the wrong format. Topic. Claire only caught the last 40 seconds, which was enough. Hale's voice didn't rise. That was the thing. He didn't shout. He used the very controlled, topic, very quiet register of a man who knew that quiet was more frightening than loud. He leaned slightly toward the nurse, not touching, just present. Too close. In the way that communicates, I could, if I wanted to. Topic. You've been here 6 years, he said. And you still can't follow a template. The nurse started, I'm sorry, you thought, he let that sit. That's your explanation. She stopped talking. Topic. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked away. And the nurse stood there, holding her clipboard, not moving. 3 people who had been nearby were looking at their phones. Topic. Or their shoes, or the wall directly in front of them. Claire was the only one looking at the nurse. She caught the woman's eye. The nurse looked away immediately. not because she was rude. Topic. Because being seen feeling something in this hallway was another thing that cost. Claire said nothing, but she remembered everything. She had encountered leaders like Hale before, in other contexts. Topic. With different job titles and different uniforms. Men who confused fear with respect, who used power as a weapon instead of a responsibility. Topic. She had learned, in places where the stakes were higher, exactly what that kind of leadership produced and exactly what it cost the people underneath it. Topic. That night she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall. She had lived in this apartment for 6 weeks, boxes still unpacked, not because she didn't have time. Topic. Because unpacking felt like a declaration she wasn't ready to make. Like signing a lease on the version of herself she was trying to become. On the wall above her dresser, she had hung one thing. Topic. A shadow box. Inside it, her staff sergeant stripes, her Marine Corps combat medic badge, and a photograph, small, slightly bleached, of her unit in Helmand Province. 8 people squinting into the sun. Topic. All of them young. All of them grinning the grin of people who had no idea what was coming. She had left that world because she needed to. Topic. Because after 8 years and 2 deployments and one particular night in a field hospital that she still couldn't think about directly, only around the edges. Topic. The way you look at something very bright. She had understood something clearly. She could not keep going and also stay intact, so she had come home. And she had told herself no more battlefields. Topic. But she was 5 days into her first week at Mercy Cross, and she already knew she was in one. The battlefield was different. No weapons, no dust, no radio static. But the same architecture underneath. Topic. The same silence that meant people had stopped believing they were allowed to speak. The same downward angle of the gaze. The same cost. She looked at the shadow box for a long time. Topic. Then she turned off the light. Topic. Day 7. Supply closet, reorganization, routine task. Assigned because she was new and new people got the tasks that needed doing but nobody else wanted. Topic. She was working through the bottom shelf, checking expiration dates, pulling everything out when she found it wedged behind the metal backing of the lowest drawer. Far back. Topic. Easy to miss if you weren't removing everything and actually looking. A plain white envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, no name on it. She almost put it back. Instead, she opened it. Topic. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, small, careful printing, the kind you use when you want to be legible but not identified. 3 sentences, Ruvum 214, January 14th. Topic. He changed the chart. I saw it. And I said nothing. God help me, TW. She read it 3 times. Room 214, January 14th. If this was from last January, that was 18 months ago. Topic. She turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. No context, no explanation. Topic. Just those sentences and 2 initials and the weight of someone who needed to put something outside themselves and had no safer place to put it. I saw it, and I said nothing. Topic. Claire stood in the supply closet for a long moment. The fluorescent light hummed above her. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped twice. She folded the paper carefully. Topic. Put it in the pocket of her scrubs. She finished reorganizing the shelf. She said nothing to anyone. But something had shifted. Something small and specific. Topic. The kind of shift you feel before you can name it. Like a door that wasn't visible a moment ago has just become visible. Still closed. But there. Topic. By the end of her second week, Claire had mapped the hospital. Not consciously. It wasn't a decision she made. It was simply what her brain did. Filed information continuously, built a picture. Topic. Noted where the pressure points were and where the silences came from and what they meant. She had noticed Runce's hands shook slightly when they heard Hale's footsteps in the corridor. Not all the time. Topic. Just when he was moving toward them and they didn't know why, doctors revised their clinical opinions mid-sentence when Hale entered a room. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment. Topic. The way you adjust when the wind shifts and you haven't decided yet whether to say so. Administrative staff held their breath in the elevator when Hale was on the same floor. Topic. And Carol Sims, Hale's executive assistant, 52 years old, iron gray hair. Topic. The expression of someone who had been professionally neutral for so long it had become architectural, moved through the building like a controlled weather system. Observing everything, saying almost nothing. Topic. But watching Claire noticed that too. The way Carol's eyes were significantly more alert than her face suggested. The way she positioned herself in hallways at angles that allowed maximum sight lines. Topic. The way she was always somehow near enough to hear without appearing to listen. She filed it, said nothing. On the morning of her 15th day, topic, she was in the medication room when Megan Flores came in, looked over her shoulder, closed the door. That was the moment Claire knew this was not a casual conversation. Topic. You saw what happened yesterday, Megan said. Not a question with the discharge summary? With Margaret Okafor. She's been here 11 years. He did that in front of her entire team. Topic. Megan's voice was careful, but underneath it, something was working hard not to move. She went home and didn't come back this morning. Called in sick. She's never called in sick. Claire looked at her. Topic. What do you want to tell me? I don't know why I'm talking to you specifically. Okay, you look at things differently. You don't look away when he does it. Most people look away, I noticed. Topic. A pause. Is it always like this? Claire asked. It's been like this for 10 years, said quietly, like a fact she had made peace with, or was trying to. Some people leave. Topic. Some people stay and just get smaller, and some people have been here so long they don't remember it being any other way. Like Dorothy, Megan glanced at her. Dorothy remembers. Topic. She just has reasons for staying quiet. What kind of reasons? Megan shook her head. Not unwilling, protective. That's hers to tell. Then she opened the door and left. Topic. Claire stood alone in the medication room. The paper from the supply closet still folded in her pocket. Room 214, January 14th. And a growing feeling in her chest she recognized from other contexts. Topic. The feeling of something that had been covered up, starting to press against the surface. She had been here 15 days. And she was beginning to understand that the supply closet note was not an anomaly. Topic. It was a symptom, and symptoms pointed somewhere. Topic. Day 18, she was reorganizing patient files, still the new person, still getting the tasks no one else claimed, when she found the folder misfilled. Topic. Wedged between records from the following March when it should have been in January. Patient name, James Whitford. Age, 71. Admission date, January 12th. Cause of death, as recorded. Topic. Cardiac event, natural causes, date of death, January 14th. She stood very still. January 14th. Room 214. She opened the folder. Read slowly. The language was standard, clinical. Topic. Everything appeared in order. Topic. Except she turned pages carefully, except for a small thing you would only notice if you had spent years reading medical documentation under pressure and had developed the habit of reading the physical page as much as the words on it. Topic. The signature on the final death certificate. The ink was different from everything else in the file. Slightly darker, a different ballpoint. Topic. The kind of difference that happens when you sign something at a different time, in a different place than when the rest of the document was completed. She took out her phone, photographed every page. Topic. Then she put the folder back exactly as she had found it. Her hands were steady, her expression neutral. Internally, topic. She did what she had learned to do in places where visible reaction was a liability. She took all of it and put it in a room inside herself with a door she could close for now and open later. Topic. That evening, she mentioned casually to Dorothy that she had noticed the camera housing on the east wing looked old. "Just making conversation," Dorothy replied without breaking stride. Topic. "That camera's been broken since last January." Someone put in a maintenance request. "Never got fixed," she said it, looking straight ahead, and Claire said, and nothing else, but she filed it. Topic. Day 21. The hospital was in its mid-week rhythm. Not the scramble of Monday, not the wind down of Friday, just steady and ordinary. And then the man on the gurney came around the corner. Topic. Gray suit jacket. Not a planned admission, someone who had collapsed somewhere in the building. The orderly pushing him was pale, moving fast but not efficiently. Topic. The kind of urgency that hasn't organized itself yet. The portable monitor flatlined at 11:47 a.m. Claire was 6 feet away. She registered 4 things simultaneously. The flatline. Topic. No doctor in the hallway. The frozen orderly. And the fact that the nearest crash cart was 20 feet away and there was no time for that. Her hands were on him before she finished the thought. Topic. Knees on floor, palms locked. She had done this on dirt floors, on helicopter decks, on the actual ground outside a forward operating base with dust in her mouth and radio static in her ears. Topic. A polished hospital hallway was practically a luxury. "Get the cart," she said, not loudly, directed and the AED. Now the orderly moved. Around her, a ring of people, watching. Topic. Waiting to see what authority she had. Whether someone would tell them it was okay. She did not wait for anyone to say it was okay. The footsteps came, hard soles. Closing fast. Who authorized this? Topic. She kept compressing. He stepped closer. The room tightened. 12 people holding their breath. Get away from that patient. "You do not have authorization." She reached back. The orderly had the AED. Topic. She took it, opened it in one motion. Everyone clear, and something in her voice, not loud, not aggressive, just absolutely certain, made everyone step back. One discharge. Topic. The patient's body jerked, settled. Then the monitor, a different sound now, not a flatline, a heartbeat. Topic. The orderly made a sound that was mostly exhale. Someone behind Claire whispered something she didn't catch. A nurse near the wall covered her mouth with her hand. Claire sat back on her heels. Steady. Topic. She looked up directly at Victor Hale. He was standing 4 feet away, and she looked at him with an expression that was not aggressive, not challenging, not afraid, just direct. Topic. The directness of someone who has been in enough situations where looking away was not an option and has simply stopped looking away. He stared at her. She held it. Something moved across his face. Topic. The brief, involuntary recalibration of someone who has just encountered a variable they did not account for. He pointed at her. His finger not entirely steady. "You're done here." Topic. "I want your badge on my desk by end of day." She stood up, pulled off her gloves. "Your patient needs ICU," she said. "He should be stable for transport, but someone needs to be with him." Topic. She handed the gloves to the orderly, said something quiet to the nearest nurse. Then she turned and walked. Not away from Hale, not toward him, just toward the next thing that needed doing. Topic. As if he had already said everything he was going to say, as if it simply wasn't enough to stop her. Later, in the locker room, she found something in the front pocket of her scrub top. Topic. She didn't remember putting it there. She reached in. A small piece of paper, folded once. She unfolded it. Blue pen. Careful handwriting. "You are not the first person to push back. You won't be the last." Topic. "But you might be the only one who can actually finish this." Room 214, January 14th. He changed the chart. "There is more, much more. Don't fight alone." She read it twice. Topic. Then she sat in the quiet locker room for a long time and thought about what she would do in the morning. Topic. Victor Hale's retaliation came fast and quietly, which was worse. She had expected confrontation, something she could stand in front of and measure. Topic. Instead, it came the way water damage comes, not visible until the ceiling starts to stain by Wednesday. Her schedule had been altered, shifts rearranged, two shortened, one relocated to the East Wing, topic, where the elevator was slow and the supply room understocked. And everyone knew those assignments were what you got when someone wanted you inconvenienced without a documentable reason by Thursday. Topic. A formal note appeared in her personnel file, filed by administration, citing unauthorized clinical intervention. The language was precise, bureaucratic. Topic. The kind that says nothing directly disprovable while implying everything that can be used. She read it standing at the nurse's station. Read it twice. Put it back in the folder, said nothing by Friday. Topic. People were stepping slightly to the side when she came down the hallway. Not all of them, not obviously. Just the small social repositioning of people who can feel which way the current is moving. Topic. She didn't blame them. She understood it completely. In environments where survival required calibration, people calibrated. That was not weakness. Topic. That was the rational response to a decade of being taught what happened when you didn't, but it was still lonely. She hadn't expected that part. Topic. And she needed to be honest with herself about this. She was beginning to feel the weight of what she was carrying. The photograph of Whitford's file on her phone. The note from the supply closet. Topic. The note from her pocket. The different ink on the signature, all of it in that room inside herself with the door closed. The door was getting heavy. Topic. 2 a.m, her apartment, not the parking garage this time. She was at her kitchen table, laptop open. Topic. A cup of actual hot coffee beside her that she had made without thinking and then forgotten to drink. She was looking at the photograph of James Whitford's file, the 41st time approximately. Topic. The different ink, the misfiled folder, the broken camera, the maintenance request that was never processed, Teresa Walsh. The overnight charge nurse, topic, who had hidden a note behind a supply drawer and then resigned 3 days later and moved out of state, all of it connected. Topic. And then the part of her brain that had been trying very hard to argue otherwise, the part that had promised herself no more battlefields, the part that had come here for quiet went quiet itself. Topic. Because she knew, had known for days, was just finishing the process of admitting it. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a covered-up death. A 71-year-old man, 3 children, topic, 7 grandchildren, an admission for a routine procedure, a record that said natural causes, topic, and a signature in different ink that said someone had come back later and made a decision about what the record would say. She closed the laptop, looked at her hands on the table, topic. She had used these hands to keep people alive in places most people would never see. She had made the right call under conditions most people would never face. Could she look away from this? Topic. She already knew the answer. She had known it since the moment she found the note in the supply closet. She was just catching up to herself. She picked up her phone, opened the photograph again, topic, and began to plan. Topic. The conversation with Megan happened on a Monday, not because either of them planned it. Because Megan came into the medication room, closed the door, looked at Claire, and said, very quietly, very directly, topic. I know you found something. What makes you think that? Because you look at the East Wing hallway every time you pass it. Specifically at the space where the camera housing is. Same way. For 2 weeks. Topic. Like you're calculating something. A pause. You're observant, Claire said. I've had to be. Megan held her gaze. What did you find? Claire considered her. The door. Topic. The weight of what she was holding. Whether this was the right moment. Then she asked, Room 218th, January 14th. Does that mean anything to you? Something happened in Megan's face. not surprise. Topic: the opposite of surprise. The expression of someone who has been waiting for someone to say a specific thing for a very long time and had started to believe no one ever would. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Topic: wait here, she said. She came back 7 minutes later. A small notebook, blue cover, edges worn soft from handling. She set it on the counter between them and put her hand flat on top of it. Topic: then she pushed it forward. 14 months, Megan said. Every incident, every date, every witness I could name. What was said, what was done, who was present. Claire opened it. Read 3 entries. Topic: closed it. Looked at Megan. Why 14 months? The Whitford death was 18 months ago. Megan's jaw tightened because it took me 4 months to understand what had happened. Topic: I knew something was wrong. But I was new here. I needed time to see the pattern before I could trust what I was seeing. She paused. Once I did, I started writing. Topic: what do you know about room 214? Claire asked. Megan looked at the door, then back. I know James Whitford didn't die of natural causes. Topic: I know the overnight doctor filed a report that didn't match what the floor nurse, Margaret Okafor, told me privately. Topic: I know the security footage from the East Wing was flagged as corrupted and unavailable in the maintenance log filed the following morning. A pause. Topic: and I know Margaret Okafor called in sick 2 weeks ago and hasn't come back. The air in the room felt denser. The weight of information that has mass to it. The initials TW, Claire said. Topic: do those mean anything to you? Megan blinked once. Teresa Walsh. She was the overnight charge nurse. She resigned 3 days after James Whitford died. Moved out of state. I've tried to find her twice. T. Topic: W. Teresa Walsh, who had hidden a piece of paper behind a supply drawer instead of walking it out the front door, because she had seen something and said nothing, and then been unable to put it down. Topic: there's a photograph of his file on my phone, Claire said. The ink on the final signature is different from everything else in the document. Megan did not look surprised. Topic: he changed the chart after the fact. That's what the evidence suggests. We'd need more than a photograph, I know. Megan picked up the notebook, held it. Topic: which is why I've been writing this for 14 months. A pause that contained a great deal. I've just been waiting for someone to give it to. She held it out. Claire took it. Topic: felt the weight of 14 months of watching and recording and staying quiet and waiting condensed into this small blue notebook with soft edges. This gets harder from here, Claire said. I know. Topic: anyone close to this becomes a target. I know that too. Okay, Claire said just that. Okay. Topic: Ruth Baxter found her on Wednesday evening. End of rounds. The hallway had thinned out. Ruth appeared at the door of the small consultation room where Claire was updating charts. Do you have a moment? Topic: not a question. Claire gestured to the chair across the desk. Ruth sat, still in surgical scrubs, probably come directly from a procedure. Topic: she sat with the contained stillness of someone who has been standing for hours and is using every available resource to hold it together for a few more minutes. She didn't speak right away. Claire waited. Topic: I've been here 22 years, Ruth finally said. I came to Mercy Cross when I was 39. My mother came to the ceremony when I got my attending privileges. She brought a camera. Topic: took 15 photographs of the lobby because she thought the marble floor was beautiful. A pause. She passed 6 years ago. Claire said nothing. Just listened. Topic: for 22 years I have tried to be a good doctor, and somewhere in the last 10 years I stopped speaking in meetings when I disagreed. I stopped pushing back on treatment decisions I thought were wrong. Topic: I started editing myself before I got the words out, because I had learned what it cost not to. She looked at her hands, a surgeon's hands. Steady. Precise. I didn't notice when it started. Topic: that's the part I keep coming back to. I just adapted. And then one day I looked at myself and didn't quite recognize. She stopped, a long silence. There was a patient, Ruth said. Room 214, topic. January 14th. I wasn't on duty that night. But I saw the file the next morning, the different ink, the discrepancy. She looked up, and I said nothing. Topic. Claire held very still. I told myself it was inconclusive, Ruth said, that there were explanations, that I didn't have enough information, that getting involved would. She stopped again. Topic. I told myself a lot of things, and all of them were true enough to be useful, a pause, and none of them were the real reason? What was the real reason? Fear. Ruth said it without drama, without softening. Topic. Just the word, flat and clean. I was afraid of what it would cost, of what he would do, of what I had spent 22 years building. A pause. I'm still afraid. I want you to know that. Topic. This is not a moment where the fear went away. I'm sitting here afraid right now. I know, Claire said, but I watched you in that hallway 11 days ago. And I thought about my mother. Topic. And those 15 photographs of the lobby. And the person she thought she was coming to celebrate. Something moved across Ruth's face. Brief. Controlled. But real. I don't know how useful I am. Topic. But I need to not be someone who saw and said nothing. Not again. Claire looked at her for a moment. Do you still have the file from room 214? Ruth met her eyes. I made a copy. Before it was archived, topic. And then, quietly, from a different direction, something Claire had not arranged. Dr. Baxter. They both looked up. Carol Sims was standing in the doorway. She looked at Ruth. Then at Claire, topic. Then she set a business card on the desk, a name on it that neither of them recognized. Below the name, in Carol's own handwriting, Eleanor Grant knows something is wrong. She just doesn't know how wrong. Yet. Topic. Then Carol turned and walked away without another word. Claire picked up the card, held it, filed it. Topic. Dorothy found Claire on Thursday evening. Not at the hospital, at Claire's car. In the parking garage, which meant Dorothy had waited, in the cold. Her hands, when she reached out to touch Claire's arm, topic, were cold through the fabric. Claire turned. Topic. And something in Dorothy's face, the look of someone who has been carrying a stone for a year and a half and has finally decided to set it down, even if their back breaks in the process, made Claire very still. Topic. I need to tell you something, Dorothy said. Okay, I can't tell you inside. I tried twice this week, and I can't do it in that building. She looked at the concrete wall. Out here feels safer. Topic. I know that's silly. It's not silly, Dorothy gathered something. And then she talked. She talked about the night of January 14th. 18 months ago, she had been on the floor. Not in room 214 directly, topic, but close enough. She had heard voices. Hale's voice, she recognized it the way you learn to recognize a weather pattern that precedes something bad. She had not gone in. Topic. She had stood in the hallway and listened, and heard enough to understand that something was being decided that should not have been decided the way it was being decided. And then she had walked away. Topic. My son was diagnosed 8 months before that night, Dorothy said. Stage 3. He started treatment at Mercy Cross. The insurance runs through the hospital's administrative system. She paused. Topic. If Hale had wanted to make things difficult, I didn't know if he could. Legally, maybe not. But when your son is in treatment and someone has any degree of influence over any part of that system, you can't. Topic. She stopped. I'm not asking you to understand. I understand, Claire said. And she did. Without hesitation, completely. Topic. Marcus finished his last treatment 2 weeks ago, Dorothy said. She said it quietly, almost to herself, still practicing saying it out loud, making it real. His last scan came back. A pause. Topic. He's going to be okay. Good, Claire said, and she meant it with her whole chest. A pause that lasted a moment and contained a great deal. So now, Dorothy said, I can talk. Topic. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Held it out, Her hand was cold, still slightly unsteady. Claire took it inside. 3 names, 2 dates, 1 room number, topic. Written in Dorothy's careful, small handwriting. The other 2 nurses on duty that floor that night, Dorothy said, and the orderly. I remember all 3 of them, 2 left within a month, topic. I lost track of where they went, but the orderly, his name was Peter Garza. He moved to Phoenix. I heard that secondhand. She paused. If you could find him, if any of them could be found, topic. What they saw would be more than what I can give you alone. Claire looked at the paper, then at Dorothy, 67 years old, 27 years in this building. A son who was going to be okay, topic. And the quiet look of a woman who had decided, whatever it cost, whatever came next, she was done carrying this one alone. You're not alone in this anymore, Claire said. Dorothy nodded once, topic. Pressed her lips together, looked away quickly, and for a moment they just stood there in the parking garage. 2 women in the cold. Neither of them said anything, topic. Sometimes the silence that means I see what this cost you is the right thing. They didn't rush past it, topic. Carol Sims said nothing to Claire directly. Not on Thursday, not on Friday, not the following Monday, when Claire passed her in the corridor, and Carol looked at her with those careful, topic, alert eyes and then looked away and continued walking. But on Tuesday morning, early, the supply room on the 2nd floor, Claire was checking inventory. Her assigned task, topic. Whoever had altered her schedule had decided tedium was a suitable punishment. She was working through the bottom shelf when she found it. Not hidden this time, just placed. On top of the 2nd shelf, topic, facing the wall, like something set aside rather than concealed, a standard manila envelope, unsealed, inside. A USB drive, topic, and a handwritten note on a strip of paper small enough to have been torn from a prescription pad. Not everything can be said out loud. Not yet. But this should be enough to start. C, topic. Claire stood with the USB in her palm. C. Carol Sims. 8 years as Victor Hale's executive assistant. 8 years of scheduling his meetings, managing his correspondence, topic, sitting outside his office while he made the kinds of calls people make when they believe no one important is listening. 8 years of apparently listening anyway and saving what she heard, topic. Claire closed her hand around the drive, put it in her pocket, finished the inventory, did not change her expression. That night, at her kitchen table, she opened it neat folders, organized by year. Topic. She opened the first one, dozens, some from Hale to department heads, some to external contacts, some that had been carefully forwarded to this drive. Over time. Over years. Topic. She opened one from 5 years ago. Ride it. Her stomach went cold. He had known. He had made a decision, and he had communicated it in writing, topic, confident that no one was reading carefully enough to preserve it. He had been wrong about that. One person had been reading. For 5 years. Carefully. Patiently. Waiting. Topic. Thursday. 2 weeks after the cardiac arrest in the hallway, Hale called a mandatory all-staff meeting. The announcement came through the internal system at 9 in the morning. All department staff. Topic. Main conference hall. 2 o'clock attendance required. No stated agenda. Which was, of course, its own agenda. Claire read the notification, felt something settle in her chest. Not fear. Topic. Something adjacent to readiness. The internal click of a person who has been preparing for something and has just received confirmation that the something is approaching. Topic. Megan appeared at her elbow at 9:15. Did you see it? Yes. It's about you, I know. What are you going to do? Claire looked at her. 26 years old. Quick eyes. Topic. A blue notebook and 14 months of courage that had been waiting for somewhere to go. I'm going to go to the meeting, Claire said, and I'm going to let him make the first move. Topic. Megan looked at her for a moment. Something moved through her face. Okay, she said quietly. At 1:45, Claire went to find Dorothy. She found her in the break room, sitting. Topic. Hands around a coffee gone cold, looking at the table with the expression of someone counting down. You don't have to go, Claire said. I know. Dorothy looked up. My son called this morning. Topic. Asked how I was. I said, fine. He said, Mom, you always say fine. Tell me something true. She almost smiled. Topic. I told him I was terrified and also that I was going to do something today I should have done a long time ago. A pause. He said, good. He said, it's about time. Topic. At 1:50, Ruth Baxter found Claire in the hallway. She said nothing at all, just fell into step beside her, and they walked toward the conference hall together. After 3 steps, topic, Megan appeared on Claire's other side. After 6 more steps, Carol Sims, appearing from the direction of the executive wing, fell into step slightly behind them. 4 women, walking down a hallway, topic, and Claire felt it, the particular feeling of not being alone in the direction you are walking, which is, she had learned over 8 years, the only thing that makes the next part possible. Topic. She pushed open the doors. The conference hall held 200 people, and every one of them was afraid. She could feel it the moment she walked in, not see it. Feel it. Topic. The weight of a room full of people who had been trained slowly, systematically over years to make themselves small. It was in the angle of their shoulders. Topic. The way they held their coffee cups with both hands even though the coffee was cold. The way their eyes moved to the door when she entered and then moved away again. 200 people. Topic. And the room felt like it was holding its breath. Victor Hale was already at the front, standing on the low platform. Not behind a podium, he never used a podium. Topic. Podiums were for people who needed something to hold on to. He stood in the open, hands clasped loosely in front of him, looking relaxed, but his jaw was set 2 degrees tighter than his posture suggested. Topic. His weight was slightly forward, and his eyes, tracking the room systematically, landed on Claire the moment she entered, and stayed there. 2 seconds. 3, then he looked away. Topic, which was its own kind of information. Topic. Hale began at 2:03. Thank you all for coming, Smooth. Practiced. I'll keep this brief, because I know you have work to get back to. A pause. Calibrated. Topic. We have recently had an incident that reflects a broader issue of protocol and professional boundaries at this institution. Another pause. Topic. When procedures are disregarded, regardless of the intention, it creates liability for the patient, for the institution, for all of you. He let that land. For all of you. Topic. Not for the person who broke protocol, for all of them. The implicit suggestion that Claire's actions were a threat to everyone in this room, that the correct response was to distance themselves from her. Topic. It was well done. She could admit that, even now, because she could feel the room shifting, the small collective lean away. The recalibration, he stepped down from the platform, topic, and started walking toward her slowly, deliberately, hard soles on polished floors. 10 years of this, topic. 10 years of public humiliations and the systematic dismantling of people's belief in their own authority. This was the ritual, the reminder. This is what happens when someone steps out of line. Watch. Remember, topic. Don't be her. He stopped 4 feet away. The roofs held still. Miss Donovan, her name like a verdict. Would you like to explain to your colleagues what you thought you were doing? Topic. Claire looked at him. She did not look at the floor, did not look at the wall, did not make the small involuntary adjustments that 200 people in this room had been making for years. Topic. She looked directly at Victor Hale. I was keeping a patient alive, she said. Quiet. Even, which is what I was hired to do. His eyes narrowed. Fractionally, you violated protocol. Topic. The patient had no pulse. Every second of delay reduces survival probability by 10%. A pause. I didn't have time for a committee. Something moved through the room. Not audible. Just a shift. Topic. Like a current adjusting. Topic. Hale stepped closer. One more step. You think that gives you the right to override. It gives me the obligation. She held his gaze. That's different. He stopped. The room was silent. Topic. And then he raised his hand. It was not the first time he had done this. That was the terrible specific knowledge that lived in this room, because almost everyone present had seen it before. The hand. Topic. The reminder that his authority was physical if it needed to be, that no one was safe from a man who had learned over 10 years that consequences did not apply to him. The hand came up. Topic. And 200 people braced. And Claire moved one motion, fluid, fast. The kind of fast that doesn't look fast until it's over. Her left hand intercepted his wrist before the movement completed. Topic. Her right hand found the pressure point below his elbow. She stepped in, not back, in, and applied the precise leverage of a defensive restraint technique designed to stop movement without causing injury. Topic. He went down on one knee, not because she threw him, because physics applied correctly does not require force. Only knowing where the pivot is. Less than 2 seconds, the room did not gasp. Topic. It did something worse. It went completely, absolutely silent. The silence of 200 people simultaneously losing the ability to process what they had just seen. Victor Hale was on one knee. Topic. In front of all of them, something moved across his face. The involuntary contraction of a man who has just encountered an error his system was not built to handle. Claire released him. Topic. Stepped back one step, reached into the pocket of her scrubs. She set her military ID on the table beside her. Flat, face up, United States Marine Corps, combat medic, staff sergeant, Claire Ann Donovan. Topic. She said nothing about it. Just placed it there, because some things do not require narration. Topic. The room read it, and she watched the reading happen, the ripple moving through 200 people as they understood who she was, what those words meant. Topic. Why her hands were steady and her breathing was even, and why she had just done, in under 2 seconds, something no one in this building had managed to do in 10 years. Hale got to his feet. Topic. His face had moved into something colder, the expression of a man who has just recalculated and decided the correct response is not retreat. Is escalation? You just assaulted. Topic. I used a standard defensive restraint technique in response to an incoming physical threat. She said it the way she would file a report. Because that was exactly what it was. There are 200 witnesses. Topic. Silence, you're finished, he said. I want security, Mr. Hale. The voice came from the second row. Carol Sims stood up, 52 years old. Topic. She stood the way a person stands when they have been preparing to stand for a very long time. Fully. No hesitation in it. She walked to the front of the room, set her phone on the table, screen up. Topic. Still recording. Then placed the USB drive beside it, and then she looked at Victor Hale. And she said, in a voice completely even, 5 years of emails. Topic. Including all correspondence related to the events of January 14th, including the email sent 3 days after James Whitford's death regarding what you called the Whitford matter. Topic. Including the instructions you gave me in writing, Mr. Hale, to contact the archiving department about the East Wing security footage. Topic. The room was so quiet, Claire could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Hale looked at Carol, and something happened in his face that Claire had not seen before. He looked small. Topic. Just for one unguarded second. The involuntary contraction of a person who has just discovered that the room they thought was empty has been occupied the whole time. Carol, he said. Warning. No, topic, she said, simply. Like the word had been waiting in her mouth for years and had finally found the exit. Topic. Then Megan Flores stood up, 26 years old, the youngest person in the room. She stood with the blue notebook held in both hands. She opened it and she began to read, not all of it. Topic. Just the first entry and the last. And 3 entries from the middle, chosen because they were representative. because they showed the pattern clearly. And a pattern, documented, topic is a different thing than an incident. An incident can be explained away. A pattern cannot. Her voice shook slightly for the first 6 words. Then it steadied, and as she read, topic, something began to happen in the room. Small things, incremental things. A nurse in the 4th row sat up slightly straighter. A doctor near the back uncrossed his arms. Topic. A woman Claire didn't know pressed both hands flat on her thighs and stared at Megan with an expression that was not quite hope yet and not quite relief yet, but lived somewhere in the territory between them. Topic. Recognition. That was the word, the expression of people hearing their own experience named out loud for the first time, because that was what the notebook was. It wasn't just documentation, topic. It was testimony, and testimony, topic, said aloud in a room full of people who have been told for 10 years that what happened to them was either their fault or their imagination. Testimony does something that policy documents cannot do, topic. It makes people feel less alone, and when people feel less alone, they stand up. A lab technician was first. 3 sentences. A morning when Hale had shoved him against a wall over a mislabeled specimen, topic. Not pushed, shoved. Full contact. And then walked away, and the technician had stood against that wall for 45 seconds before his legs felt normal again. He had never told anyone until now. Topic. He sat down, and then someone else stood up, and then another. Topic. And then Dorothy Wells stood up slowly. The way a person stands up when they have been sitting for a long time, under a heavy thing, and the standing itself requires effort. She didn't need notes. Topic. She didn't have a notebook. She had been carrying this in her head for 18 months, and she knew every word of it by heart in the way you know things you have rehearsed alone in the dark. Topic. My name is Dorothy Wells, she said. I have been a nurse at Mercy Cross Hospital for 27 years, she paused. On the night of January 14th, 18 months ago, I was on duty on the 4th floor. Topic. At 11:20 p.m., I heard voices from the direction of room 214. I recognized one of the voices. She did not look at Hale. She looked at the room, at all of them. I stood in the hallway. I listened. Topic. I heard enough to understand that a decision was being made about the documentation of James Whitford's death that did not reflect what I knew had occurred on that floor. Earlier in the evening, the room. Topic. Completely still, I did not go in, Dorothy said. I walked away, and I have lived with that decision for 18 months. I told myself I had reasons, and I did have reasons. Topic. My son was receiving cancer treatment through this hospital's coverage plan. I was afraid of what interference might mean for his care. A pause. Those were real reasons. I want to be clear about that. Topic. She looked at her hands, but my son finished his last treatment 2 weeks ago, and his scan came back clean. And when he called to tell me, the first thing I thought was, now I can talk. Topic. And the second thing was, I have to, because I have grandchildren who are going to grow up watching what I do, and I need them to see someone who, when it mattered, told the truth. She looked up. At the room. Topic. Not at Hale. James Whitford was 71 years old, she said. He had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. He did not die of natural causes. And I was in that hallway, and I walked away. Topic. 4 seconds of silence. Then someone in the back of the room began to cry. Topic. The doors at the back of the conference hall opened. Eleanor Grant walked in, 64 years old. Chair of the board of directors. 1 year in the role. White hair cut precisely. Topic. The expression of someone extremely intelligent and currently extremely unhappy about something she has just learned. 2 board members walked behind her. And behind them, moving quickly, topic, a notepad already open, a woman neither Claire nor most of the room had seen before, Lena Pruitt. Mid-40s, dark coat, topic. The focused energy of someone who has been working on something for a long time and has just received confirmation that today is the day it arrives. Lena had not been called by Claire, had not been arranged. Topic. Claire had not known she was coming, but she was here. And from the way Lena surveyed the room, the USB drive on the table, the notebook in Megan's hands, Dorothy Wells still standing. Topic. 200 faces turned toward the doors. She had been waiting for exactly this moment. Eleanor Grant walked to the front of the room. She looked at Hale. One long look. Topic. The kind that contains an entire recalibration. Topic. The kind that says, I knew something was wrong, and I did not look closely enough, and I am going to spend a significant portion of the rest of my professional life making sure this is the last time anything like this happens while I am in charge. Topic. Then she looked at the room. My name is Eleanor Grant. I am the chair of this board, and I need everyone to hear me say this clearly. She paused. What you have described today should never have happened. Topic. Not for one day, not for 10 years, not under any circumstances. Another pause, and I am sorry that it did. Topic. Effective immediately, Eleanor said. Victor Hale is suspended from all duties at Mercy Cross Hospital. Pending a full independent investigation, she looked at him directly. Topic. Your access credentials will be deactivated within the hour. Security will escort you out. A pause. Victor Hale looked at her. The room looked at him. He was very still. Topic. Something working behind his eyes. And then he looked at Claire. This isn't over, he said. Quiet. Controlled. The fury of a man watching something he spent 10 years building come down in one afternoon. Topic. Claire looked at him. Yes, she said. It is. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned, walked toward the doors. Every person in that room watched him go. Topic. The hard soles on polished floors. Slower now. The doors opened, closed behind him. Topic. And the sound of those footsteps, the footsteps that had been emptying rooms and altering decisions and pressing people smaller for 10 years, faded down the hallway and disappeared. Topic. And Mercy Cross Hospital exhaled, not all at once, not dramatically, just a collective loosening. Topic. The specific sound and feeling of 200 people simultaneously letting out a breath they had been holding, in one form or another, for a very long time. Lena Pruitt moved through the room efficiently. Topic. Collecting names, distributing cards. Eleanor Grant stood at the front with the board members, already building a list in her head, already knowing the list would be long. And Dorothy Wells sat down. Topic. Finally, in the chair closest to the front wall, hands in her lap, eyes on the middle distance, not sad, not triumphant, just present. Topic. The way of someone who has just put down something very heavy and is getting used to the feeling of lighter. Topic. Ruth Baxter found Claire by the wall. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, which was Claire was beginning to understand Ruth's way of saying the things she hadn't yet found the language for. Topic. She's going to be all right, Ruth said finally, nodding toward Dorothy. I know. Pause. Ruth asked. Claire considered this, really considered it. Topic. Which was different from how she would have answered 6 months ago. I think so, she said. Ask me in a week. Ruth almost smiled. Fair. They stood there a moment. 22 years. Topic. Ruth said quietly. Not as complaint, just a notation. I spent 22 years in this building not doing that. She paused. I keep thinking about my mother's photographs of the lobby. She was so proud. Topic. She took 15 photographs of a marble floor because she was that proud. Another pause. I wonder what she would say today. What do you think she'd say? Ruth was quiet for a moment. Topic. I think she'd say, it's about time, said the way Dorothy's son had said it on the phone that morning. 3 words containing everything. And then she'd probably say, don't make me wait another 22 years. Topic. Claire looked at her. You won't, she said. Lena Pruitt found Claire 20 minutes later in the corridor outside the hall, where she had gone for 3 minutes of quiet. "You didn't call me," Lena said. Topic: "I didn't know you. Carol Sims called me 7 months ago." She said she was still gathering. She said she'd let me know when it was time. Lena paused. "She sent me a text this morning at 6 a.m. It said, topic: Today Claire thought about Carol." In the second row, hands folded, phone recording. 5 years of patience, what happens now? Claire asked. Criminal investigation. Topic: The Whitford matter alone is significant. The falsified records, the destroyed footage, the wage theft. The board has enough to refer to law enforcement today? Lena paused. And there are 2 other hospitals. Topic: Same ownership group, same pattern. Hale has been doing this longer than 10 years. Topic: Eleanor Grant found her at 4:30. The conference hall had mostly emptied. Board members in closed-door meetings with legal counsel. Topic: Megan with 2 other nurses and an administrator who had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of opening to implement changes she had been prevented from proposing. Ruth had gone back to rounds. Topic: Because patients still needed care. And Ruth was, above all things, a doctor. Dorothy was still sitting. Not because she was unwell, just not quite ready to go back to the regular world yet. Topic: Needing a few more minutes in the space where the thing had happened, Claire understood that completely. Eleanor sat across from her without preamble. "We need to talk about what comes next." Okay. Topic: The board is committed to a full independent review. Staffing, compensation, clinical protocols, administrative decision-making, all of it. External auditors, no exceptions. A pause. Topic: We should have been paying closer attention. "I understand that. I appreciate that," Claire said. "I'd like to ask you to temporarily coordinate our internal culture reform process." Topic: Working directly with the board, with staff representatives, and with external consultants. Your role would be to ensure that the staff's experience is centered in every decision made during this period. Topic: A pause. It's a significant ask, especially given that you've been here less than 30 days. Claire looked at her. "I'll do it," she said. "On one condition." "Name it." Topic: Dorothy Wells leads the Staff Advisory Committee. Not as a formality. As a real leadership role with real authority. Claire held Eleanor's gaze. "She has 27 years in this building." Topic: She knows every person on every floor and what they need and what's been done to them. She's the right person, and she came forward when it cost her something. That should mean something explicit. Topic: Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Done," she said, without hesitation. Topic: She told Dorothy that evening. Dorothy was still in the conference hall, moved to a chair by the window where the late afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, turning everything slightly gold. Topic: She was looking at her phone. A photograph on the screen that Claire couldn't see from where she stood. She looked up when Claire appeared. "How's your son?" Claire asked. "I called him an hour ago." Topic: Dorothy looked at the photograph. He cried a little. "I cried a lot. He's driving up from Richmond this weekend. Says he wants to take me to dinner somewhere with tablecloths." Topic: He sounds like a man who knows what matters. He does. Dorothy lowered her phone. "You wanted to tell me something." "The board has agreed to establish a staff advisory committee to lead the reform process." Topic: Claire said. "Real authority. Real oversight. Not a rubber stamp." A pause. "They've asked you to chair it." Dorothy looked at her for a long time, long enough that Claire wondered if she had said it right. Topic: Then Dorothy said, "Me, you, not you. You have 27 years here. You know this building. You know these people. And you came forward when it cost you something." Claire paused. "I'll be there." Topic: I'll help however I can. But this has to be led by someone who has been in it. Dorothy looked at the window. The October afternoon folding into evening, the sky going from gold to something softer. Topic: I was planning to retire, she said. Plant a garden. Learn to make bread properly. I've been making bad bread for 30 years. The garden and the bread can still happen. Just later. Just later. A pause. Topic. Ask me tomorrow morning, Dorothy said. Before coffee. That's when I'm most honest. I'll be there at 6:40. Bring the coffee. Dorothy's mouth curved, just slightly. Topic. Because there still isn't any milk, and at this point I've decided I simply don't care. Topic. 3 weeks later, the hallway of Mercy Cross looked the same. Same pale blue walls, same polished floors, same morning light through the same windows, but it sounded different. Topic. More like a hallway in a hospital should sound. People talking at normal volume, occasionally laughing. The energy of a place where people have stopped rationing their own presence. Topic. Claire was doing her morning rounds, walking every floor, saying good morning to everyone she passed, by name. She had spent her first weeks here learning names, and now she used them. Topic. The first time she said, "Good morning, Marcus," to the lab technician who had stood up in the conference hall. Topic. He stopped walking and looked at her for a second with an expression she hadn't fully understood until later. Until she understood that he hadn't been called by name by anyone in management for a very long time. Topic. That having your name said by someone choosing to say it, that was its own small thing. Small things added up. She found Dorothy on the 6th floor, in the advisory committee's meeting room. Topic. Which had previously been an underused storage room that Dorothy had claimed by putting her name on a sign on the door and telling facilities that this was now a meeting room and would they please bring 3 more chairs. Topic. Which they had. Within the day, Dorothy was at the table with 2 nurses and the administrative coordinator who had once been called aggressively mediocre. They were going through a draft policy document. Topic. Dorothy had a red pen. She was marking something. She looked up when Claire appeared. "Come in or don't," she said. "Either way, close the door." Topic. The draft on Clause 7 is a disaster, and we need to discuss it without the whole floor listening. Claire came in, closed the door. Dorothy handed her a copy without preamble. Clause 7. Read it. Topic. Claire, read it. It's circular. Completely circular. This is what happens when lawyers write about human beings. They make circles. Topic. What do you want it to say? Claire asked. Dorothy considered. The way she considered things now, directly, without apology. Topic. Without the slight downward angle of a woman who has learned to ask for less than she means. Topic. I wanted to say that any staff member who experiences or witnesses intimidation or physical threat has not just the right, but the institutional support to report it immediately, without a supervisor's approval. Topic. Without fear. I wanted to say that, and then I wanted to mean that. Those are 2 different things, and I need both. Claire looked at her. Then write that, she said. Exactly that. Topic. And make legal figure out how to put it in their language after. Dorothy smiled, took back the page, wrote. Later, passing through the lobby, Claire stopped. Above the reception desk, a new sign had gone up. Topic. Simple. White letters on a dark background. SPECT saves lives. Eleanor Grant had approved it on day 3 of the reform process. Ruth Baxter appeared beside her, still in her white coat. Topic. Heading somewhere with purpose, the way Ruth always moved now. She looked at the sign. Then at Claire. My mother would have taken a photograph of that, she said. Take one for her. Ruth looked at her. Topic. Then she took out her phone, pointed it at the sign above the reception desk, and took the photograph. She stood there looking at it on the screen for a moment. The small rectangle of text, respect saves topic, in a hospital lobby that her mother had walked into 30 years ago with a camera and a great deal of pride. I'm speaking at Grand Rounds next month, Ruth said. First time in 4 years. Topic. Something I've been researching for 3 years and not talking about. She paused. He attended once. Years ago. Topic. Made a comment from the back of the room in front of 40 colleagues that I still haven't fully put down. But I'm presenting next month. I'll be there, Claire said. Ruth looked away. Topic. The sideways look of someone not quite ready to receive something directly. You don't have to. I'll be there, Claire said again. Ruth put her phone in her pocket. Nodded. Once. Lunch, she said. Lunch. Topic. Claire agreed. Topic. She was getting into her car at the end of the day, not sitting in the parking garage at 2 in the morning. Just getting into her car, which was different, which she had noticed was increasingly different. Topic. She sat in the driver's seat and took a breath on her phone. One unread text from Megan, Clause 7, got fixed. Dorothy rewrote it in 15 minutes. Legal is scared of her. I think this is going fine. Topic. She typed back, it's going more than fine. She set the phone on the passenger seat, looked at the steering wheel. She thought about the shadow box on her apartment wall. The stripes? The badge. Topic. The photograph of 8 people squinting into the sun, all of them young. All of them grinning the grin of people who had no idea what was coming. She had left that world because she needed to. Topic. Because she had used herself up in ways that required refilling. Because she had told herself, no more battlefields. And she had been wrong about that. Not wrong that she needed to come home. Topic. Not wrong that she needed quiet for a while, but wrong about the geography. Because she had been thinking of battlefields as places, specific coordinates, desert, mountain. Topic. A valley in a province on the other side of the world. She understood now. The battlefield was never a place. It was a moment. Topic. Specifically, the moment when a person decides whether they are going to keep looking away or not. She had made that decision in a hallway. Topic. In front of a man whose footsteps had been emptying rooms for 10 years, and Dorothy Wells had made it in a parking garage on a cold evening, and Megan had made it every day for 14 months, quietly. Topic. In a blue notebook with no guarantee that anyone would ever need it. That was the thing worth knowing. That courage didn't always look like one moment. Topic. Sometimes it looked like 14 months of showing up and writing things down and believing that one day someone would need what you were building. Topic. Her phone rang unknown number, out of state. She looked at it, let it ring once more, then picked up, is this Claire Donovan? A woman's voice. Careful. Topic. Nervous in the way of someone who has rehearsed making this call and is now actually making it, and the two things feel nothing alike. Yes, my name is Karen Walsh. I'm a nurse at Hargrove Medical in Cincinnati. Topic. I heard about what happened at Mercy Cross. About what you did. A pause. Small and full. Our director. He's been here for 8 years. And it's the same. Exactly the same. Topic. People are afraid to come to work. There's a patient situation I don't know what to do with. And I didn't know who to call except Karen. Yes? Claire looked out through the windshield. Topic. Beyond the parking garage, not visible but known, the building she had just walked out of, the pale blue walls, the polished floors, the new sign in the lobby. Topic. The meeting room on the 6th floor, where Dorothy Wells was marking up a policy document with a red pen and absolutely no apology. And somewhere on the 4th floor. Topic. 3 nurses in the middle of a laugh that happened because something was genuinely funny and nobody stopped themselves. Tell me everything, Claire said. Topic. And she reached for the notepad she had started keeping in the cup holder. And she began to write, because some things, once you understand them, you cannot put down. Topic. Because no one gets to be alone in this, because that was the promise. Not the one she had made to herself on that first October night, the one about quiet. The real one. The one without words exactly. Topic. Just the motion of picking up the phone and writing down the name and saying, I hear you, I'm here. Tell me what's happening. And meaning it. Topic. The way she had meant every compression in that hallway on day 21, the way Dorothy had meant every word in the cold of the parking garage, the way Megan had meant every entry in a blue notebook topic on every ordinary day for 14 months. That kind of meaning, the kind that holds